Greetings and welcome. We are in Junior English, and today our objective is to analyze, if not listen to, two classic texts in American 20th century thought. The first will be the famous open letter, it's often referred to by James Baldwin, My Dungeon Shook, Letter to My Nephew. I'm on page 1192 there. The second text that we'll be working with is the McGee Tan text that will begin on page 1206. Called Mother Tongue. Now I want to point out something about your hymnals real quickly that one or two of you have maybe forgotten. Look on page 1193. 1193. Do you see it with me? Do you see on the far side where it says explore the key ideas and then it says what protects your sense of self? That is an indicator of what this text is about you're about to listen to and study. Notice on page 1205. A similar kind of question, what languages do you speak? Let me give you a schemata, or an outline, for both of these two texts. You'll want to take a few brief notes, and then we'll spend the rest of our time analyzing. Let's take a look first of all at Dungeon Shook. Baldwin is an incredibly important writer, monumentally important in American 20th century thought. You can see his dates. He will die in 1987. And so already, notice, we are beginning to work closer and closer to the date of your own birth in the passing of Baldwin. His important work will come in the form of primarily his novels. However, we want to point out as well this letter. This is a letter Baldwin wrote to his nephew. And he urges him, you'll want to write this down, he urges him to define himself in his own terms and not in terms of the white man's world. Baldwin, of course, living in a time, and his nephew, when black African Americans are defined in large measure by the color of their skin by both white as well as black Americans because of the color of their skin. Then Baldwin makes an interesting observation. That's why this essay becomes so important. Baldwin will write that white people need to make African Americans believe they are inferior to whites, and that until white people understand the cruelty in white people's history, they can't be freed from it. In other words, until white students understand the history of racism in America, white people and black people will never be freed from it. He will encourage and even, we use the word extol, that is to say celebrates, his nephew for not succumbing to the white man's definition of him, and he encourages him to help whites see their true selves, because until they do that, they can never really understand either white or black. This is an interesting argument. We'll listen to it and we'll analyze it as we read. The McGee Tan text, let's go there now, on 1206. We'll listen to these together. The McGee Tan text is a fascinating reflection on Englishes. Emphasis on the S. Tan points out that there are different Englishes. She herself, a Chinese American, speaks fluent English, and yet she's acutely aware of the English that is often spoken by those who can't speak English well. She reflects on the different Englishes used in, for your notes now, you want to write this down, different contexts. Focusing, of course, largely on the English that she speaks with her mother. All right? Tan's mother, of course, completely fluent in Chinese, speaks, however, a kind of English that limits her interactions with authorities, such as her banker or her stockbroker, doctors reviewing, her medical tests, that kind of thing. Tan, although viewing her mother's English as clear and direct, sees the need to use standard English to succeed in American society. Tan, in this really classic essay, says, if you want to have a chance for social economic advancement in America, you need to have the command of the English language in standard English. The better you can speak the language, the better are your opportunities to be able to advance socially. She extends her discussion to the linguistic problems the children of immigrants may have in school, and concludes with an application for all of the Englishes and an appreciation for all of the Englishes that she speaks. She recognizes the value of learning English in academic, in economic, and social ways, but she also recognizes the value of having multiple Englishes. Let's go ahead back now to the Baldwin text, and we're ready to go to work. This is Baldwin's My Dungeon Shook. Flow it closely.
My dungeon shook.
Remember your ACT prep. Follow along with the tip of that pen. Some of you will end up retaking the ACT, of course.
Baldwin.
Or not.
You are about to read My Dungeon Shook, Letter to My Nephew. A letter that James Baldwin wrote to his nephew James, advising him on how to live as an African-American man in a racist world. Read along to hear Baldwin's advice to his nephew. How do Baldwin's thoughts compare with the opinions of other authors you have read in this unit?
Dear James, I have begun this letter 5 times and torn it up 5 times. I keep seeing your face, which is also the face of your father and my brother. Like him, you are tough, dark, vulnerable, moody, with a very definite tendency to sound truculent because you want no one to think you are soft. You may be like your grandfather in this, I don't know, but certainly both you and your father resemble him very much physically. Well, he is dead, he never saw you, and he had a terrible life. He was defeated long before he died, because at the bottom of his heart, he really believed what white people said about him. This is one of the reasons that he became so holy. I am sure that your father has told you something about all that. Neither you nor your father exhibit any tendency toward holiness. You really are of another era, part of what happened when the Negro left the land and came into what the late E. Franklin Frazier called the cities of destruction. You can only be destroyed by believing that you really are what the white world calls a nigger. I tell you this because I love you, and please don't you ever forget it. I have known both of you all your lives, have carried your daddy in my arms and on my shoulders, kissed and spanked him, and watched him learn to walk. I don't know if you've known anybody from that far back, if you've loved anybody that long, first as an infant, then as a child, then as a man. You gain a strange perspective on time and human pain and effort. Other people cannot see what I see whenever I look into your father's face. For behind your father's face, as it is today, are all those other faces which were his. Let him laugh, and I see a cellar your father does not remember, and a house he does not remember, and I hear in his present laughter, his laughter as a child. Let him curse, and I remember him falling down the cellar steps and howling, and I remember with pain his tears, which my hand, or your grandmother's, so easily wiped away. But no one's hand can wipe away those tears he sheds invisibly today, which one hears in his laughter and in his speech and in his songs. I know what the world has done to my brother and how narrowly he has survived it. And I know which is much worse, and this is the crime of which I accuse my country and my countrymen, and for which neither I nor time nor history will ever forgive them, that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it and do not want to know it. One can be, indeed, one must strive to become tough and philosophical concerning destruction and death, for this is what most of mankind has been best at since we have heard of man. But remember, most of mankind is not all of mankind.
Huge point.
But it is not permissible that the authors of devastation should also be innocent. It is the innocence which constitutes the crime. Now, my dear namesake, these innocent and well-meaning people, your countrymen, have caused you to be born under conditions not very far removed from those described for us by Charles Dickens in the London of more than 100 years ago. I hear the chorus of the innocents screaming, "No, this is not true. How bitter you are." But I am writing this letter to you to try to tell you something about how to handle them, for most of them do not yet really know that you exist. I know the conditions under which you were born, for I was there. Your countrymen were not there and haven't made it yet. Your grandmother was also there, and no one has ever accused her of being bitter. I suggest that the innocents check with her. She isn't hard to find. Your countrymen don't know that she exists either, though she has been working for them all their lives. Well, you were born. Here you came, something like 15 years ago. And though your father and mother and grandmother, looking about the streets through which they were carrying you, staring at the walls into which they brought you, had every reason to be heavy-hearted, yet they were not. For here you were, Big James, named for me. You were a big baby. I was not. Here you were, to be loved. To be loved, baby, hard, at once and forever, to strengthen you against the loveless world. Remember that. I know how black it looks today for you. It looked bad that day too. Yes, we were trembling. We have not stopped trembling yet. But if we had not loved each other, none of us would have survived. And now you must survive because we love you and for the sake of your children and your children's children. This innocent country set you down in a ghetto in which, in fact, it intended that you should perish. Let me spell out precisely what I mean by that, for the heart of the matter is here.
Yeah, follow this
and
argument.
the root of my dispute with my country.
Very radical
you were born
position.
where you were born and faced the future that you faced because you were black and for no other reason. The limits of your ambition were thus expected to be set forever. You were born into a society which spelled out with brutal clarity and in as many ways as possible that you were a worthless human being. You were not expected to aspire to excellence. You were expected to make peace with mediocrity. Wherever you have turned, James, in your short time on this earth, you have been told where you could go and what you could do and how you could do it, and where you could live and whom you could marry. I know your countrymen do not agree with me about this, and I hear them saying, "You exaggerate." They do not know Harlem, and I do. So do you. Take no one's word for anything, including mine, but trust your experience. Know whence you came. If you know whence you came, there is really no limit to where you can go. The details and symbols of your life have been deliberately constructed to make you believe what white people say about you. Please try to remember that what they believe, as well as what they do and cause you to endure, does not testify to your inferiority, but to their inhumanity and fear. Please try to be clear, dear James, through the storm which rages about your youthful head today, about the reality which lies behind the words acceptance and integration. There is no reason for you to try to become like white people, and there is no basis whatever for their impertinent assumption that they must accept you. The really terrible thing, old buddy, is that you must accept them. And I mean that very seriously. You must accept them and accept them with love. For these innocent people have no other hope. They are, in effect, still trapped in a history which they do not understand. And until they understand it, they cannot be released from it. They have had to believe for many years and for innumerable reasons that black men are inferior to white men. Many of them indeed know better, but as you will discover, People find it very difficult to act on what they know. To act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. In this case, the danger in the minds of most white Americans is the loss of their identity. Try to imagine how you would feel if you woke up one morning to find the sun shining and all the stars aflame. You would be frightened because it is out of the order of nature. Any upheaval in the universe is terrifying because it so profoundly attacks one's sense of one's own reality. Well, the black man has functioned in the white man's world as a fixed star, as an immovable pillar, and as he moves out of his place, heaven and earth are shaken to their foundations. You don't be afraid. I said that it was intended that you should perish in the ghetto, perish by never being allowed to go behind the white man's definitions, by never being allowed to spell your proper name. You have, and many of us have, defeated this intention. And by a terrible law, a terrible paradox, those innocents who believed that your imprisonment made them safe are losing their grasp of reality. But these men are your brothers, your lost younger brothers.
This is huge.
And if the word integration means anything, this is what it means. That we, with love, shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are, to cease fleeing from reality and begin to change it. For this is your home, my friend. Do not be driven from it. Great men have done great things here and will again. And we can make America what America must become. It will be hard, James, but you come from sturdy peasant stock, men who picked cotton and dammed rivers and built railroads, and in the teeth of the most terrifying odds achieved an unassailable and monumental dignity. You come from a long line of great poets, some of the greatest poets since Homer. One of them said, "The very time I thought I was lost, my dungeon shook and my chains fell off." You know and I know that the country is celebrating 100 years of freedom 100 years too soon. We cannot be free until they are free.
A compelling...
God bless you, James, and Godspeed.
A compelling observation at the end. Let's pay attention now at 2B real quickly. Allusion, A-L-L-U-S-I-O-N. Not what a magician does when, for example, makes some kind of change. An allusion. Do we know what that is, Cottrell? Are you familiar with an allusion? A reference to a literary text, normally. What is the title of this essay, /open letter? What is the allusion, A-L-L-U-S-I-O-N, at 2B, write it down. When the title of this text is My Dungeon Shook, write it down real quickly. Let's see who was listening or reading closely. Write it, don't say it. We're referencing what when we do this? How about it, Tashima? What are we referencing? It was right there at the end. Your focus was somewhat missing at the end. That's why I'm pointing this out. How about it, Hunter?
Poem.
Very end. What poem? Poem written by who?
By someone in his family.
No?
Homer.
Homer. What is a Homer?
Writer.
We're not talking about the Simpsons now, are we? We're talking about the great Greek poet, Homer. What poem would he be referencing?
Odyssey.
The Odyssey. Very good. That's right, the Odyssey. So there you go, an observation. Now, let's go ahead and go to Mother Tongue, and let's try to make sure we're focused.
Mother Tongue.
Here we go. I need better focus out of you while we're reading this text.
How does the way you speak contribute to your identity? In the following personal essay, Mother Tongue, Amy Tan talks about the differences between the English she speaks and the English spoken by her mother, a Chinese immigrant. As you read, think about Tan's own sense of identity.
I am not a scholar of English or literature.
Let's go, focus.
I cannot give you much more than personal opinions on the English language and its variations in this country or others. I am a writer. And by that definition, I am someone who has always loved language. I am fascinated by language in daily life. I spend a great deal of my time thinking about the power of language, The way it can evoke an emotion, a visual image, a complex idea, or a simple truth. Language is the tool of my trade, and I use them all the Englishes I grew up with. Recently, I was made keenly aware of the different Englishes I do use. I was giving a talk to a large group of people, the same talk I had already given to half a dozen other groups. The nature of the talk was about my writing, my life, and my book, The Joy Luck Club. The talk was going along well enough, until I remembered one major difference that made the whole talk sound wrong. My mother was in the room, and it was perhaps the first time she had heard me give a lengthy speech using the kind of English I have never used with her. I was saying things like, the intersection of memory upon imagination, and there is an aspect of my fiction that relates to thus and thus. A speech filled with carefully wrought grammatical phrases, burdened, it suddenly seemed to me, with nominalized forms, past perfect tenses, conditional phrases, all the forms of standard English that I had learned in school and through books, the forms of English I did not use at home with my mother. Just last week, I was walking down the street with my mother, and I again found myself conscious of the English I was using, the English I do use with her. We were talking about the price of new and used furniture, and I heard myself saying this, not waste money that way. My husband was with us as well, and he didn't notice any switch in my English. And then I realized why. It's because over the 20 years we've been together, I've often used that same kind of English with him, and sometimes he even uses it with me. It has become our language of intimacy, a different sort of English that relates to family talk, the language I grew up with. So you'll have some idea of what this family talk I heard sounds like. I'll quote what my mother said during a recent conversation which I videotaped and then transcribed. During this conversation, my mother was talking about a political gangster in Shanghai who had the same last name as her family's, Du, and how the gangster in his early years wanted to be adopted by her family, which was rich by comparison. Later, the gangster became more powerful, far richer than my mother's family, and one day showed up at my mother's wedding to pay his respects. Here's what she said in part. Du Yu Song, having business like fruit stand, like off the street kind. He is Du like Du Zong, but not Sung Ming Island people. The local people call Putong, the river east side. He belonged to that side local people. That man want to ask Du Zong father, take him in like become own family. Du Zong father wasn't looked down on him, but didn't take seriously, until that man big like become a mafia. Now important person, very hard to inviting him. Chinese way, came only to show respect, don't stay for dinner. Respect for making big celebration, he shows up. Mean gives lots of respect. Chinese custom. Chinese social life that way. If too important won't have to stay too long. He come to my wedding. I didn't see, I heard it. I gone to boys' side. They have YMCA dinner. Chinese age I was 19. You should know that my mother's expressive command of English belies how much she actually understands. She reads the Forbes report, listens to Wall Street Week, converses daily with her stockbroker, reads all of Shirley MacLaine's books with ease. All kinds of things I can't begin to understand. Yet some of my friends tell me they understand 50% of what my mother says. Some say they understand 80 to 90%. Some say they understand none of it, as if she were speaking pure Chinese. But to me, my mother's English is perfectly clear, perfectly natural. It's my mother tongue. Her language, as I hear it, is vivid, direct, full of observation and imagery. That was the language that helped shape the way I saw things, expressed things, made sense of the world. Lately, I've been giving more thought to the kind of English my mother speaks. Like others, I have described it to people as broken or fractured English. But I wince when I say that. It has always bothered me that I can think of no way to describe it other than broken, as if it were damaged and needed to be fixed, as if it lacked a certain wholeness and soundness. I've heard other terms used, limited English, for example, but they seem just as bad, as if everything is limited, including people's perceptions of the limited English speaker.
Let's focus.
I know this for a fact, because when I was growing up, my mother's limited English limited my perception of her.
Yes, it's huge.
I was ashamed of her English. I believed that her English reflected the quality of what she had to say. That is, because she expressed them imperfectly, her thoughts were imperfect. And I had plenty of empirical evidence to support me. The fact that people in department stores, at banks, and at restaurants did not take her seriously, did not give her good service, pretended not to understand her, or even acted as if they did not hear her. My mother has long realized the limitations of her English as well. When I was 15, she used to have me call people on the phone to pretend I was she.
Yeah, watch this.
In this guise, I was forced to ask for information, or even to complain and yell at people who had been rude to her. One time it was a call to her stockbroker in New York. She had cashed out her small portfolio, and it just so happened we were going to go to New York the next week, our very first trip outside California. I had to get on the phone and say in an adolescent voice that was not very convincing, "This is Mrs. Tan." And my mother was standing in the back whispering loudly, "Why he don't send me check, already 2 weeks late. So mad he lied to me, losing me money." And then I said in perfect English, "Yes, I'm getting rather concerned. You had agreed to send the check 2 weeks ago, but it hasn't arrived." Then she began to talk more loudly. "What he want? I come to New York, tell him in front of his boss, you cheating me?" And I was trying to calm her down, make her be quiet, while telling the stockbroker, "I can't tolerate any more excuses. If I don't receive the check immediately, I'm going to have to speak to your manager when I'm in New York next week." And sure enough, the following week, there we were in front of this astonished stockbroker, and I was sitting there red-faced and quiet, and my mother, the real Mrs. Tan, was shouting at his boss in her impeccable broken English. We used a similar routine just 5 days ago for a situation that was far less humorous. My mother had gone to the hospital for an appointment to find out about a benign brain tumor a CAT scan had revealed a month ago. She said she had spoken very good English, her best English, no mistakes. Still, she said, the hospital did not apologize when they said they had lost the CAT scan and she had come for nothing. She said they did not seem to have any sympathy when she told them she was anxious to know the exact diagnosis, since her husband and son had both died of brain tumors. She said they would not give her any more information until the next time, and she would have to make another appointment for that. So she said she would not leave until the doctor called her daughter. She wouldn't budge. And when the doctor finally called her daughter, me, who spoke in perfect English, lo and behold, we had assurances the CAT scan would be found, promises that a conference call on Monday would be held, and apologies for any suffering my mother had gone through for a most regrettable mistake. I think my mother's English almost had an effect on limiting my possibilities in life as well. Sociologists and linguists probably will tell you that a person's developing language skills are more influenced by peers. But I do think that the language spoken in the family, especially in immigrant families, which are more insular, plays a large role in shaping the language of the child. And I believe that it affected my results on achievement tests, IQ tests, and the SAT. While my English skills were never judged as poor, compared to math, English could not be considered my strong suit. In grade school, I did moderately well, getting perhaps B's, sometimes B pluses in English, and scoring perhaps in the 60th or 70th percentile on achievement tests. But those scores were not good enough to override the opinion that my true abilities lay in math and science, because in those areas I achieved A's and scored in the 90th percentile or higher. This was understandable. Math is precise. There is only one correct answer. Whereas for me, at least, the answers on English tests were always a judgment call.
Right. It's an interesting point, right?
And personal experience.
If you love math, you get it.
Those tests were constructed around items like fill-in-the-blank sentence completion, such as, even though Tom was blank, Mary thought he was blank. And the correct answer always seemed to be the most bland combinations of thoughts. For example, even though Tom was shy, Mary thought he was charming, with the grammatical structure, even though, limiting the correct answer to some sort of semantic opposites, so you wouldn't get answers like, even though Tom was foolish, Mary thought he was ridiculous. Well, according to my mother, there were very few limitations as to what Tom could have been and what Mary might have thought of him, so I never did well on tests like that. The same was true with word analogies, pairs of words in which you were supposed to find some sort of logical, semantic relationship. For example, sunset is to nightfall as blank is to blank. And here you would be presented with a list of 4 possible pairs, one of which showed the same kind of relationship. Red is to stoplight, bus is to arrival, chills is to fever, yawn is to boring. Well, I could never think that way. I knew what the tests were asking, but I could not block out of my mind the images already created by the first pair. Sunset is to nightfall.
Yeah, follow that, right?
And I would see a burst
Language
of colors
acquisition.
against
I need
the
more focus out of you,
darkening
Ricardo.
sky,
You should be
the
following
moon
this and
rising,
reading.
the
Let's go.
lowering of a curtain of stars. And all the other pairs of words, red, bus, stoplight, boring, just threw up a mass of confusing images, making it impossible for me to sort out something as logical as saying, a sunset precedes nightfall is the same as a chill precedes a fever. The only way I would have gotten that answer right would have been to imagine an associative situation. For example, my being disobedient and staying out past sunset, catching a chill at night, which turns into feverish pneumonia as punishment, which indeed did happen to me. I have been thinking about all this lately, about my mother's English, about achievement tests, because lately I've been asked, as a writer, why there are not more Asian Americans represented in American literature.
Right, this is a good question.
Why are there few Asian Americans enrolled in creative writing programs? Why do so many Chinese students go into engineering? Well, these are broad sociological questions I can't begin to answer. But I have noticed in surveys, in fact just last week, that Asian students as a whole always do significantly better on math achievement tests than in English. And this makes me think that there are other Asian American students whose English spoken in the home might also be described as broken or limited. And perhaps they also have teachers who are steering them away from writing
Right,
and
it's an important
into math
point.
and science, which is what happened to me. Fortunately, I happen to be rebellious in nature and enjoy the challenge of disproving assumptions made about me.
Right.
I became an